Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
Trust the reality of the numbers, not your instinct if you think that this is all silly nonsense. Trust the numbers. See that you are losing productivity as an employer because people are unable to come to work. Understand and trust the fact that this is a fact.
People want to leave work in a compartment and push it to one side, but actually when they get home, there's an email, there's a text message, there's a phone call, there's an expectation that you're always on.
Think of this as a long-term cultural mission which will make your workplace happier, will make you happier, but also understand that your staff want you to do this, and if you don't, you're not going to be successful with them and they're not going to be successful for you.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community.
The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday for this World Mental Health Day 2024. So we're putting this out on Thursday, not Monday. So apologies if we're a little bit behind in the schedule. But of course, World Mental Health Day is where there is a global focus on mental health. So I want to make sure we've got a podcast that is ripe and ready to go for today. And actually, the theme of World Mental Health Day 2024 is workplace mental health. Now, you will know that for many years I've been talking about the Where's Your Head At campaign, which is about mental health first aiders within every workplace and also places like colleges, so that every workplace is equipped with the ability to know and understand the mental health impacts that work has on the lives of its employees, but also how mental health issues might find their way into a workplace and actually cause that workplace particular problems, and having the skill sets to be able to deal with it. Now, the stats around this are absolutely clear and they're absolutely stark. 83% of employees have suffered in some way, shape or form poor mental health at work. 18 million days are lost to mental health problems each and every year. There's more stats on this one. 1 in 5 people say they aren't able to manage the stress and pressure that comes with work. 50% of workers have one symptom or more of stress and burnout. And 58% of workers don't feel like they can tell anyone about it. A third certainly wouldn't be telling their boss. It's absolutely huge, this, as an issue, and 71% of businesses now offer wellbeing benefits. But how many of them are actually making a difference? How many are actually being looked at? How many are being constantly reviewed and enhanced to make sure that you can get the best for your business? What's the return on investment? That's the other big question that people ask around this one as well. If I invest in mental health for my staff, what do I get in return? And I was talking to Natasha Devon from the Where's Your Head At campaign, and she was telling me that it's a really hard thing to put your finger on because, of course, if you have an intervention in regards to your mental health, because you speak to a colleague, and as a result of that, you don't need to take time off work, that isn't something which clocks up on a chart somewhere. Absolutely not. That's just something which means that that person stays in the workplace. But what actually happens then is that person stays within the workplace because they're helped and supported. They don't go looking for jobs elsewhere. Your staff turnover reduces. The presenteeism, this idea that you are in the workplace but your mind is elsewhere, that reduces too. And it means that then people stay loyal to your business. They're less likely to move on. They'll be more productive and so on and so forth. So businesses that do invest in mental health for their employees see the benefit, but they see it over a long term. If you're looking for a short-term fix, there are obvious benefits to that too. And that naturally, those conversations you have with your employees will throw up opportunities and maybe highlight some of the issues you might have within a workplace and give those employees, again, an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm listened to here. There was a problem and together we fixed it. It really does make a difference. But as we'll hear now with today's guest on Mental Health Monday, Simon Gunning, the CEO of Calm, organisations like businesses and employers do find themselves at the forefront of the crisis that we have in the UK at the moment when it comes to mental health.
And I think always have done, Mick. I don't think this is a new thing. We define ourselves by our work quite often, don't we? Whether that's voluntary or just because we spend so much time there. And we absolutely know that burnout, for example, is a very, very common concern and a very common problem for people. And that burnout doesn't necessarily have to come from being some kind of high-flying private jet executive. Burnout of having to turn up every day to do a job of work which perhaps isn't enjoyable but needs to be done in order to pay the rent, and rent is getting more expensive. Cost of living continues to be a massive issue. That burnout is based on an expense of energy, but also an expense on your emotional well-being. And it's bad for employees and it's bad for employers.
In terms of that, there'll be countless people out there who've got jobs that they don't really like, and it's the slog of heading in. At what point do you think people need to be aware that actually that slog could potentially lead into something else? Because we've all had those jobs where it's like, oh, you know what, I need to get out of this as quickly as possible. What are those things that you hear that kind of tip people into that thing where this actually becomes a bit of a more of a systematic problem for their lives?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've probably all had jobs that we don't particularly enjoy. And stress is a part of life, isn't it? Stress is an important part of life because it can inform us how to behave in order to protect ourselves. So the stress of the fight and flight response has, helps us as individuals and as a species. But stress can be so all-consuming throughout your life. Now, we all know as well that we don't leave stress at work, do we? We take it out of work and it becomes a part of our personal life. We all know that for so many of us, when we experience stress at work or unhappiness at work, we're going to be taking that into our private lives. And that's something that we really need to be aware of for our own happiness, that we need to be able to compartmentalize parts of our lives. And that can take quite a lot of personal work. A recent survey showed that nearly a third of the 12,000 people surveyed by Global Business Collaboration for Better Workplace Mental Health said that they would not tell their boss when they were feeling stress at work. It's seen as a weakness, isn't it? Especially amongst certain parts of society. It's seen as something that we are unable to demonstrate in our workplace, and when that's adversely affecting us outside of that workplace, that starts to become a real problem. So I would really suggest that we watch for how we're behaving in work, but how that's affecting us out of work, because I mean, there's probably something really awful about bringing your whole self to work. You probably don't want to do that, do you? But you want to bring your best self, and you want to be able to take that best self with you when you leave work at whatever time that is and you go home.
How much of what some of those sort of stress levels do you think are down to the fact that actually people want to leave work in a compartment and push it to one side, but actually when they get home, there's an email, there's a text message, there's a phone call, there's an expectation that you're always on, and actually the old 9 to 5 is pretty much dead now, and actually there's more of an expectation that there's this always on, you're always working, you're often at the beck and call. Is that something you hear a lot about?
Oh yeah, it's completely exhausting, and I'm guilty of that as well. I'm guilty of picking up my phone at 9:30 on a 9:30 on a Friday night, thinking, "Oh, I've just got to send," and you've got to not do that. We have to. Well, I've got to do it for my own brain, haven't I? Don't you think? I think I have. I've got to do that and find a part of my life where I'm not always thinking about that part, the work and what's going to be happening on Monday and those kind of things. But I've also got to think about the people with whom I work, with my colleagues. That if I'm sending that email or that Slack message or that WhatsApp or whatever it might be, whether that's to a work group or to an individual, I am now setting certain expectations for them that somebody is going to think, oh God, I've got to reply to that now. And I've brought them with my own problem. I think we have to be compassionate and considerate for the people around us, because that's going to come back on us too, right? That we create an environment around our work life where we're productive and we're happy. We continue to turn up because we are not experiencing burnout and stress. Let's share that around the place. And that's certainly what we try to do at Calm.
That's the classic thing, isn't it? Of I sent you this email received at 9:07 on a Monday morning. I sent you this email on Friday, wondered if you had a chance to come back to me on it yet. And you think, hang on a minute, you didn't send this 3 days ago. You sent this 7 minutes ago. That's when you sent it,
Yeah.
because 7 minutes ago was when I logged on at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. Let me put this to you, and you're the CEO of Calm, and the work you do is without question. But it's got to come from the CEO as well, hasn't it? Like if the CEO is sending emails at 9:30 on a Friday to members of staff. That speaks, doesn't it, to maybe a culture within a workplace that everyone's always on, and there's an expectation because the boss is doing it, so you should be doing it too. That's one of those things that senior members of staff have got to bear in mind, isn't it?
It is, and I sort of reiterate that I don't think that stress at work, in its sort of cliched portrayal, is correct. It would be it's the high flying business people, it's the big money earners. I think that I think yes, it probably is. It is stressful being okay. It is stressful being a CEO. There you are. I put it out there. It's really stressful when you're struggling to feed your kids and you're going to work in an environment which is very different to the environment that I work in. And I think we need to appreciate that these human brains react in the same way to the stimulus around them. And if you've got a CEO of a business who's setting those expectations, or if you've got a middle manager who's setting those expectations, the people that are working into them, it's exactly the same principle. If you've got somebody who is not in an email type situation, environment, but those demands are being placed on them, then that grinds you down, and that leads to what is it's a technical term, burnout. We've just published a guide for burnout at work, about how to understand when your brain isn't working in the way that it should. Understand also that for so many people, going to the pub after work, that could be a really sociable thing, but it could be an indicator that actually things aren't going well. If you start to become reliant on substances, you start to self-medicate to reduce that stress, then the materials that we've made for World Mental Health Day is around understanding burnout and then dealing with it. And if the way to sort of maybe address that for us is that we've made that sort of a part of compulsory reading for people that work at Calm as well. And a lot of us manage people, and we have to take those lessons and apply them to ourselves for our own well-being and for the people around us.
Give us a sense of burnout. What does it feel like?
An inability to perform to a level where you really expect yourself to be able to get to. I think it's not freeing our brains to have some of the good chemicals which are not work related. Understanding that we're multifaceted creatures that need different sorts of part of our lives. We need leisure. We need to be able to divert our brains into other areas. For some people, me included, I get a huge amount of pleasure from work, but I need to educate myself to understand that if that's all I do, then at some point pretty soon I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. And this isn't weakness. This isn't an expression really necessarily of vulnerability. This is an understanding of how human brains work, because they're chemically driven machines and they break. And if we don't understand the boundaries where we can take those brains and what we can do to make them feel better, we'll break them.
We've seen the consequences, aren't we, of not having, the best practices in place for this, 18 million days lost to mental health, across the
Amazing.
UK. Big impact on the economy there, of course, as well as those sort of individual businesses. So from a GDP scale, this is an issue of scale. And there are 2.3 million people who would normally be in work but are currently out of work. And actually, when you look at some of the factors around that, mental health issues is one of the major players as to why people aren't returning to the workplace as well. So, I mean, if you were to do this on almost on a return on investment point of view, you could make a strong economic case. We should be making the human and the social case for this, but actually, from a purely economic point of view, decision makers would look at this and go, "Oh, this absolutely makes sense to tackle and deal with because it actually affects our bottom line."
Well, it's irrefutable. I mean, the problem that we have is purely cultural. It isn't scientific or medical. The problem is a cultural reluctance to acknowledge brains as being something which can make us feel ill. That, well, you have the big knee operation, and it was like, he's got through it. He's a tough guy, and he's come back to work a week earlier than he was meant to. And we will acknowledge physical injury, illness, much more readily than we will acknowledge what we perceive to be non-physical. But of course, it is physical because it's an organ, it's your brain. And the reason why I think we are, as a society, but certainly business and business leaders, commerce, are reluctant to recognize those numbers that you just mentioned, it's purely cultural, that you think of it as being weak. And that's daft, because the ultimate bottom line is the bottom line. People are unable to work because they are feeling emotionally, medically, physically, through the reaction of their brains, unable to do so. So it's an investment. We have a thing on our website called Champion Health. And it's about training people in a corporate or a non-corporate environment. I encourage everybody to go and have a look at it and play with it, about to understand what anxiety really is, what different forms of either mental discomfort, mental ill health, but fundamentally what your brain does and what it's meant to do. Understand how that works and take it into every environment, including the workplace, because you're much better off having happy people come to work, whether they're selling your thing or or making your thing, whatever it is they do. That's going to be better for your business.
Let me ask you about Pizza Friday. Businesses who go, yeah, we look after the well-being of our staff. Every Friday at 3 p.m, pizzas show up, and that's our way of, letting them let their hair down. Nothing else in place, emails at 8 o'clock at night, phone calls left, right, and centre, angry messages from senior members of staff about your work, efforts at any given time. But the pizza's always there on a Friday, and that's a well-being. You must hear stories about that all the time, even from organisations who maybe from a well-meaning point of view go, "Oh, Simon, of course we look after our staff and we do this," and you must think that's like not even close. I mean, there's an intention there, but you're not close.
It's hard work to get it right, and I don't get it right very often. You'll find that you think you're doing something with all the best intentions and you got it wrong. Maybe your tone of voice is wrong, maybe the way that you delivered something is wrong, and you've got to listen to what the people affected by what you're doing think of what it is that you're doing. And I speak as a dinosaur. As like I've worked through various industries like advertising, or the record business in the noughties, where you're just ground into the dirt and nobody cares about anybody. You're just climbing over everybody else to get to the top, and it's evil and nobody cares. And that was the world. And I find it difficult, and I think it's important to acknowledge finding it difficult. So something like Pizza Friday is so off tone if you're not doing the important stuff. If you're doing the important stuff, if you are thinking about workloads, so we work to software where we can see it's not always 100% accurate, and there are humans involved and you've got to talk to them too, but we can see where people are in relation to capacity. So we can see when somebody is over 100% capacity, and we'll deal with that. We've got an operations director who will hold us to that quite rightly. That's one thing. We have a lot, bearing in mind what we do, we're a suicide prevention organisation. People deal with things which are very difficult. I liken it to kind of putting a little stone in your rucksack every day. And after a while, dealing with suicide prevention, that rucksack can get really heavy. So we have, for all of our staff, access to counselling services, so that if they're feeling that they need it, they can get it. And that isn't applicable to every employer, obviously, but it is to us. And then we work through our values, which are so important, and we make sure that those values are a part of the way people work, and they can hold us to account, or certainly me to account, if I'm not living those values. And one of those values for us out of 5 is we care a lot. We care a lot about the people we're trying to save, about the people that we're working with to save those people. But we also care a lot about our employees, and a pizza ain't doing it. What is doing it is the whole joined up story of understanding, and again, as a dinosaur, understanding that this is people's lives, and this can define a big chunk of who they are and their personality and their happiness. And it's much better for Calm as an employer if those people are happy and productive. Plus, it's just a nicer way to live your life. And the pizza is the bit on the top, which is great. But all of that work underneath, all of that understanding that we're developing people's lives for their material happiness, for their progression, for their self-respect, their self-worth, their feeling a part of something. I quite often talk about Calm as a gang, that being a part of a gang where you're included and your opinion is valued, is so brilliant for people, and it encourages people to be able to be really effective and demand the best of the people around them and themselves. And to me, that's being happy at work.
I've been an
It's not a
advocate.
pizza.
Yeah, it's not an anti-pizza agenda. It's an anti-pizza Friday. I've been a
Got work
long-term
trust.
advocate of mental health first aiders within the workplace. What I've not been an
Yeah,
advocate of, though, is businesses who in 2018 sent a few people on a first aid course, mental health
yeah,
first aid course, and then went, "Oh, box ticked. We'll get a little
yeah,
kite mark for our company now, and we'll put a little plaque up in our reception, and then we won't do
yeah.
anything else." How much of having positive mental health within the workplace is actually not just about having structure, it's about processes as well, that this is an ongoing conversation, if you like.
Yeah, it's about, it certainly isn't one and done. You can't put things in place and expect them to be right forever, but it's also about communicating the existence of those and giving people the permission. Back to that survey where people don't want to talk to their boss when they've got something going wrong with their brain, but they will do when they've got a cold or COVID or whatever it might be. It's about an really always on, never stop communication process to let people understand that they are able to take action when they need it. Alongside the mental health first aider in the workplace who is never used, the same I think applies for workplace helplines, which are put in place and nobody ever rings, because there's always this suspicion that somebody's going to be recording it, and if your boss finds out, then that boss might not have sympathy with a mental health condition, and you'll get into trouble or your career path will be blocked. So as employers, it's not a finished job. You can't tick a box or a number of boxes and then think you're done. You need to put people in charge of these things who will really understand how people are doing. We run an ENPS survey every quarter, which is quite an agricultural sort of tool. It's just, would you recommend Calm to people, to friends and family? It's not nuanced, but it gives us kind of a guideline of where we're doing in relation to where we were 6 months ago. A little bit like Fitbit. I don't really know how many steps I'm doing. I just know if I did more today than I did yesterday, the other way around. And surveys, giving people the ability to feed back on how things are doing is the ultimate litmus test. But doing that and then not listening to it is the ultimate insult, which is probably an indicator of a Pizza Friday type mentality.
Let me ask you one last question then, Simon. In terms of for organizations who are thinking, we're not in this space, we need to be in this space, it sounds like it would be good for us, but we do not even know where to begin. Because if we were beginning, we'd probably start with Pizza Friday. What are those steps? Yeah. What would you say to those organizations who haven't even considered this as an opportunity or a benefit to their organization, are unsure about what investment they need to make in it, for instance? What do you say to them to encourage them to take them steps to actually get those measures in place?
Trust the reality of the numbers, not your instinct, if you think that this is all silly nonsense. And lots of people do think this is all silly nonsense still in 2020, nearly 2025. People think this is all made up. It's all, Gen Z avocado, Gen X avocado type, nonsense. It isn't. Trust the numbers. See that you are losing productivity as an employer because people are unable to come to work because you're not creating an environment for them to be fruitful and productive, or they are coming to work, but they're not performing. Understand and trust the fact that this is a fact, and then listen to your staff. It's really hard that I don't hold myself up as some kind of exemplar. What I would hold up with the people around me at Calm who really know what they're doing. The thing that I've educated myself to do is to trust them to be good, because they are good. So trust people around you to advise you on how your staff are feeling, and then go and seek out those resources. Come to Calm, do our Champion Health training, encourage your staff to do that. Read the stuff that we've made around burnout in the workplace, but then also about all the things that could be affecting the people who work in your business. Anxiety and stress and burnout. Think of this as a long-term cultural mission which will make your workplace happier, will make you happier, and will result in retaining the really good staff, maybe churning away the staff that aren't really into into a progressive, forward-focused agenda. But also understand that your staff want you to do this, and if you don't, you're not going to be successful with them, and they're not going to be successful for you.
Simon, it's always a pleasure to speak. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your time today.
Not at all, Mick. Thanks very much.
Simon Gunning, the CEO of Calm, the campaign against living miserably. I'll put links to their website in the podcast notes. They're a brilliant organisation doing some fantastic work. If you're looking for ways to support Calm, by the way, they're the current Omaze charity partner. You know, that organisation that does those massive prizes that you'll see on TV. Their prize draw currently is to win a house in Devon, with the money raised going directly towards Calm's life-saving services. I'll put a link to that in the podcast notes as well. Thanks to Simon, brilliant guest. Someone who actually turned to Calm to look for help and advice is actually going to be our guest on Monday's podcast. So the next episode of Mental Health Monday, Sadie's our guest. So please do subscribe to the podcast. As ever, there are support services out there for you. If you would like to speak to someone from a listening point of view, the Samaritans are available on 116 123. If you want to find mental health services where you live, go to the Hub of Hope, hubofhope.co.uk, type in your postcode, those local services will appear. If you want to text somebody, you can text SHOUT to 85258 and someone will respond to you through that. But whatever's going on in your life, do keep those conversations moving. Do look for those organisations like Calm, like the services you find on Hub of Hope on World Mental Health Day. Do not be on your own. Thank you as ever for listening to Mental Health Monday. We'll be back very soon.